Good morning. The divorce rate in Canada has been steadily increasing since the pandemic, with money issues being blamed as the number one reason for splitting up. So it's not such a big leap that finances continue to play a role during the division of marital assets. Here to shine a spotlight on what you need to consider is Christopher Yu, a lawyer with Shulman Partners. Good morning, Christopher.
Good morning, Megan. It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we start, how much has the stress of finances intensified?
Greatly, Megan. And I think you don't have to be a lawyer to know that. What we find that people are doing is they're arguing over money. So they're arguing over, they have a certain amount of income. Where should that money be spent? You can have one spouse who feels there should be more leeway to spend on certain things while the other one disagrees, which leads to tension. On the other hand, sometimes, and sadly, parties have no plan at all, find themselves knee-deep in mounting credit card debts and bills, just trying to survive with the rising cost of groceries, rent, whatever it might be. And that is a stressor. So perhaps a marriage isn't going well. You have a couple here that isn't connecting with each other. Maybe there's some issues arising elsewhere. And then you pile on the rising cost of living and inflation to that situation, and it becomes that much more combustible.
And especially, I'm imagining when you have to split up a house.
Oh, absolutely. And I was just talking about, what leads to people getting to that point. After you're in the, when you're in the process of divorce, then you've got a whole other host of financial issues. How are you going to divide your assets? How are you going to divide? A house is a big one. For a lot of people, it's the biggest asset that needs to be divided. And the rising cost of living has meant that, it's possible that people would have bought a house, for instance, at all-time highs. And then now they're divorcing, they find, oh, we got to sell this place, but we're going to be at a loss. How are they going to cope with that? You have issues like what's going to happen with your bank accounts, what's going to happen with your investments, all of which need to be divided, anything that was accumulated during the marriage. So finances play a huge role there and is often one of the biggest issues, obviously the other one being parenting. Sometimes people argue over who's going to be responsible for certain debts. Let's say there's a home equity line of credit involved and someone pulled money out of there to fund a business in their name. So they've used joint debt to fund a personal asset. And there's a whole host of issues that can arise when we're talking about finances in a divorce.
And who is responsible for debts accrued during the marriage? Is it 50-50?
The short answer to that is any asset or debt that was accrued during the marriage is split between the parties. So it doesn't really matter who incurred the debt, because if I incurred the debt solely on my own line of credit, for instance, half of that debt gets shared with my spouse. Whereas if it were a joint line of credit, and we're equally liable to the lending institution for that debt. So we would both be equally responsible for paying it off.
If you had one pearl of wisdom to share with people that are actually going through a divorce, what would it be?
You need to develop a financial plan. And what that means is you need to take into account that when you separate or when you divorce, there's going to be a change in your lifestyle. Whereas before you had theoretically two spouses earning and you guys were sharing expenses, you're now on your own and you're paying for your own expenses. You potentially have some support obligations in place. It is so crucial for you to know how much you're bringing in, work out how much you can spend, and how much you can put away for retirement. Let's not forget about the retirement part, because we all know that the longer you put that off, the worse it gets for you. So it doesn't really matter how much you earn, because someone that earns 100 but spends 90 is worse off than someone that earns 60 but only spends 40. So develop that financial plan. If you need a financial advisor, get in touch with a financial advisor, but just make sure you're not overspending and that you have in your mind what it is you can spend on and what you can't spend on and how much you need to save.
Well, that is great advice. Christopher, thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on, Megan.
Christopher Yu is a lawyer with Shulman Partners. For CBC Radio, I'm Megan Reed.